Happy Monday, and welcome back to the LordanArts channel. I'm John Lordan. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery, and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's episode is called The Free Bird. No matter how much you prepare and take care of yourself or your children, sometimes tragedy will strike from the place you least expect it. On October 18th, 1996, in Rome, Georgia, the Bowling family was enjoying time at home in their double-wide trailer with their 15-year-old son Brian, his siblings, and some friends. As they watched Harry and the Hendersons, they heard a knock at the door. It was a lifelong friend of Brian's named Joshua Story. Joshua was frequently in trouble, both with the police and his parents. When he would be kicked out for bad behavior, the bowling house was where he was always welcomed with open arms. The boys went to Brian's room and listened to Bone Thugs-n-Harmony, the song The Crossroads. Brian loved their music, and that song was his favorite. He felt it spoke both to him and his friends as their own personal soundtrack. Brian then came out to answer a telephone call from his girlfriend, and moments after he took the phone back into his bedroom, his family heard a loud pop. His mother assumed that one of his speakers had blown from the music being played too loud, and she went to his room to check on it. When she opened the door, she could see her son laying on the floor. When she told him to get up, he didn't move, and as she moved closer, she could see blood starting to pool around his head. She checked Brian to see that he was in a serious state and he needed CPR. The telephone was still in Brian's hand. It was retrieved and 911 was called. Brian's head was cushioned with a pillow to try to slow the bleeding while his mother worked to keep her son alive. The family demanded to know what happened from Josh. He stated that he had brought a gun to the house and he and Brian were playing Russian roulette. He said that while speaking to his girlfriend on the phone, Brian took the gun for his turn, held it up to his head, and it went off. Despite their efforts, Brian passed away at a hospital the following morning. Police questioned Joshua that night, and the reply that he gave investigators differed from the story that he had told the family. This time, he stated that they were playing Russian roulette when Brian handed the gun back to Joshua. Then, he said it just went off accidentally. Investigators seemed to agree with the boy's story, and it was categorized as an accidental killing for a few days at least. That's when the Bowling family contacted investigators and shared their doubts about Joshua's story. Unfortunately, they weren't interviewed on the night of the tragedy by law enforcement. They didn't feel like there was enough time for any game like this to have taken place. The time from Joshua entering the home to Brian taking his phone call from his girlfriend was just too tight. They also argued that he would not have been so careless as to play Russian roulette. Over the next few months, investigators built their case. A witness was found who said she heard Joshua and another 17-year-old boy from town, Lee Clark, talking about the night of Brian's death at a party. Joshua had apparently stolen a safe from his father that held $3,200 and the gun that had been used in the shooting. Joshua and Lee then hid the money in a nearby cemetery, and Brian witnessed this. They thought that Brian had told his mother about it. See, all three boys belonged to a local gang called the Free Birds, whose members were known for burglary and other petty thefts. According to their code, Brian now had to die because of what he told his mother. Investigators found that Lee had an alibi for the night of Brian's death. He was at home, and there were two other witnesses that corroborated it. However, they interviewed a man who had been in the bowling house the night of the shooting, and he claimed that he actually saw Lee running from the house and through the backyard. The town coroner said that he had a gut feeling that the wound was not from a game of Russian roulette because the shot could not have gone the trajectory that it did if it was from Russian roulette. He made this observation even though he was not a medical doctor and no actual autopsy was even conducted. Story and Clark were both arrested on charges of murder. After a short trial in January of 1998, both young men were convicted of murder and conspiracy to commit murder and were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison. For more than 20 years, they sat proclaiming their innocence and trying to find a way to overturn their convictions. By this time, Lee was working with the Georgia Innocence Project in the hopes that they would help free him. Another prisoner he knew was also working with them, and he had a suggestion. Why not do a podcast? This man had worked with a woman named Susan Simpson on the podcast Undisclosed and suggested Clark give it a try. At first, he refused, but as more time wore on, he began not only talking with Susan, but confiding in her. She agreed to take up his case, along with her co-host, Yacinda Davis, on their podcast, Proof. They started by re-interviewing witnesses from the original trial and started to see that things were not as they initially seemed. Quote, "When we finally found and were able to talk to those two witnesses, it really solidified that both of these guys had been wrongly convicted," Susan said. The witness from the party who claimed to have heard the boys talking about their murder plot was questioned. Her testimony was key in putting both young men in jail, but years later, she did a complete reversal and told the hosts that police had coerced her into making that statement after one officer asked for sexual favors and another threatened to call child services to have her children taken away from her. The man that witnessed Lee at the home was also found. He originally identified Lee from a photo lineup. The man had a hearing and speech impairment. But in court, when he was asked for his testimony, he didn't use an interpreter or American Sign Language. The prosecutor simply stood behind Lee Clark, and the man gave the court an affirmative. Susan and Yacinda had difficulty communicating with the man, but after some time were able to find his old school teacher who was able to help them. It turned out that this witness wasn't even at the house that night. The shooting that he was talking about happened way back in 1976 and was an unrelated but factually similar shooting. Soon, defense teams for both men had set hearings in motion to have their convictions re-examined, and they even had the help of some of the Bowling family in doing it. When the new evidence came to light, Bryant's family agreed to take an objective look at this case and reevaluate some of the things that they've been told in the past. Two of the Bowling family members even spoke out at their hearings in support of them. Finally, after spending 25 years in prison, both were released in December of 2022 as free men. All of the charges against the now 43-year-old Lee Clark were dismissed. He said, "You never think something like that is going to happen to you. Never would I have thought I would spend more than half my life in prison, especially for something I didn't do." He is now living with his family and adjusting to his new life. He plans to go back to school and then get a job. The Georgia Innocence Project will continue to work with him to provide the resources he needs to start anew. Joshua Story admitted to bringing the gun to Bryant's house. A plea deal was struck that charged him with involuntary manslaughter. It carried a 10-year sentence, but after spending 25 years in jail, it was marked as time served. He was officially exonerated of the murder charge. He has had more trouble adjusting to his new life than Lee. His first night at home, he was afraid to fall asleep in case he woke up and his exoneration was all just a dream. He too is now working to build a new life for himself and found that the family that he used to once be able to turn to was once again standing behind him. Quote, "When they finally came around to knowing the truth and said, 'We forgive you and we know you didn't kill him and we love you,' that meant more to me than anything." Case cracked. I would like to thank CNN.com, The Guardian, The New York Times, NBCNews.com, The Washington Post, and Newspapers.com. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case, and here she is now to discuss it with us. Well, Christy, here we are, another one solved by podcast. This is starting to become a thing. But I have to ask, what the heck happened with this investigation?
I know. It's ridiculous. I mean, the police closed the case. The family says they have doubts. So then they open a homicide investigation and start fabricating witnesses and false testimonies.
Yeah, it's weird. They just run from one extreme and just blow through the other and like, hey, let's infringe on people's rights along the way. And it's unbelievable. I'm almost wondering if like they had it in for these kids. Like, I don't know how big. Did you get any sense about this gang? Is it like a legit gang, or is this just what a group of kids called themselves?
No, it is a legit gang. I don't
Okay.
know that it still exists, but
Okay.
they had, it's not as big as, say, the Crips or anything like that. But
Yeah.
no, it was a legitimate one.
So maybe, I don't know, maybe just law enforcement knew that they were part of that and they just had it in for these kids and they just wanted to kind of take them off the board as soon as they could and figured they could stick this charge on them. But this, I mean, that is not justice. I mean,
No,
that's
no. And there was
unbelievable.
such an abrupt change there. You would think it would have to be, right?
It seems like, I mean, someone had it in for them. I mean,
Yeah.
what was the, why would you go to these lengths? Why would you threaten other people and turn them into witnesses and accomplices in a different type of crime
Yeah.
practically? Yeah, this is one of those cases where I really wish that they had, I'm always a person that kind of leans on the physical evidence. Like I wish that we had much more detail and that they had, do we know like what was his fingerprints found on the gun? Did they do GSR testing?
Well, and that's odd. They did do GSR testing, but I
Okay.
couldn't find anywhere that they showed any results for it.
It might be because if he was in the same room, he might
Mm,
wind up with gunshot residue on him anyway. But I think that they could tell based on the amount and if it was found on his hand.
you would
Um,
think.
well, and we also don't know if he went shooting somewhere else. Like if you just stole your dad's
No,
gun, are you going to take it outside and fire one off just to see what it's like or something? I don't know.
true.
But I'm really struggling with this case because just based on the pieces that we know about it from the story here today, I don't buy that Brian did this. And it
Mm.
seems like Lee was never there. And that leaves us looking at Joshua. And he does wind up with an involuntary manslaughter charge. So it seems like whatever physical evidence they had that they put the gun in his hand in some way.
Well, unfortunately, the telephone had to be pried from Brian's right hand,
Yeah.
and he was shot in the right side of the skull. So if he had the phone in his hand, he couldn't have done that.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty convincing. I mean, and on top of that, we also have at least Joshua's story to law enforcement was that the gun went off when it was handed back to
Yeah.
him. But yeah, just some confirmation. Like if they, it'd be interesting to me to know if Brian's fingerprints were actually on that gun at all, because I don't know that I buy this whole Russian roulette thing either.
Yeah, I know.
Honestly, when I first started reading through this, my mind just jumped to was Joshua upset that Brian was speaking to this girl on the phone? Like, is it someone that maybe he had feelings for as well? But I'm also really caught up on this aspect of so he steals this gun from his father, and then he brings it over to this other house, this family that is taking care of him in times where he needs it. And it's clear that he had the intent to at least bring this dangerous item into their home. And then, the kids are showing it to each other in the bedroom or however we get to the point of the gunshot being fired. All
Yeah.
of that risk is mitigated if Joshua does not bring the gun to that house, that he's not
Mhm.
supposed to have anyway. So it's just, I'm, I don't know that he should have deserved life in prison. And also considering their age, they weren't adults during this trial, right?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the crime happened when they were 17, but
Oh,
they did go to court as adults.
yeah, they
So I
tried
would
him.
imagine.
Okay, they tried him as adults. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm really conflicted. I mean, I feel like I'm supposed to be happy that they were released. And honestly, for Lee, I do feel like that. And it's also
Hmm.
interesting that he's the catalyst for like the Innocence Project connection and the podcast and all that stuff. Like it really
Yeah.
seems like that's totally legit. But for Joshua, for some reason, I'm just emotionally conflicted. Um, Regardless, he served his time for the reduced
Hmm.
charge. And, now we all have this story to look at and hopefully learn some lessons from.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Do we know, has law enforcement been held accountable for any of this nonsense that went on with this investigation?
Well, the Washington Post reported in December of 2022 that they weren't so sure.
Oh,
No one with the Floyd County Police Department would comment for their article on this case.
I was hoping that you had some information that I couldn't find. I actually went looking as well and just trying to see, hey, is anyone raising any concerns here?
Nope.
Nothing as of yet. Now, this is a little bit of a recent case. Obviously, we're only a month and a half away from the Washington Post's article on this.
Hmm.
And I'd be very surprised if there isn't a civil suit that is going to be brought against law enforcement for this, particularly from Lee.
Well, something needs to happen.
Yeah.
This makes me angry what they
Yeah.
did. It's
But
ridiculous.
what I'm worried about is even if there is a civil suit that's brought, we see what happens in cases like this. Usually there's some type of quiet settlement and all of a sudden none of us ever hear about that again. There's a lot of really wrong things that happened in this case that should be exposed and people that should be held accountable.
I agree.
Yeah. Just really doesn't feel like justice occurs in this case for anyone on the board.
No.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Christy, thank you so much for all your hard work on this. We really appreciate all the work you do here, and I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters, Luciana S. and Angela Welch Sola. Since 2015, we have always run limited commercial ads for the benefit of the viewers and the families that we're trying to help. Obviously, we can't do that without support. If you'd like to help, please visit LordanArts.com. There, you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like HCC recently did. We really appreciate your support on our mission to run as few ads as possible and help as many families as we can. Remember, you can get another LordanArts story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow, and every Tuesday after that, visit SeriouslyMysterious.com and subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe below and hit that bell icon so you never miss an upload. Also, if you'd like to hang out with me live, please join one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. You can find a link in the description box below for our new channel, LordanArts Studio 2. And of course, I'll be back with a new unsolved mystery for you on Friday, right here on the LordanArts channel.